So it's a little bit, a couple minutes after 2. I suspect we're going to have more people coming in, so I told the gatekeepers out there, that would be our daughter Kathy and her husband Tim, to make sure they let them in for the same price that you paid when you all got here early. So thank you. Thank you all for coming. My name is B.J. Costello. I chair the Albany Waterway, Inc. And this is Jim Campbell. He's, a recent guest. He's speaking next. How good is it to be together today? I mean, how good is this?
Almost Thanksgiving.
A couple of things, just for some housekeeping matters. I will say some words, and then we're going to have presentations by Lynn Tantillo and Susanna Drake, who are here. And then we'll have a panel, and Pam Howard, who's the CEO of Historic Albany, will join them. We'll have questions, and then Paul Grondell and Marcus will hand out index cards that are right up front here and pencils for anyone who has a question for the panel. So I encourage you to use that if you have a question that has not been answered. So why are we here? We are here for one reason only. And the reason is, sitting over in the corner, I'd like to recognize Pat Fahey. Please stand up, Pat. And Pat Fahey, through some very hard work, was able to secure funding to study 3 different projects on the river that I'm going to talk about in a minute. The first one was to whether or not 787, as you now know it, all those raised highways should come down. Another project was to place a cover or cap over 787 so you could get to the river. And the third proposal was a proposal we're going to talk about today, which was to create a waterway to bring the Hudson River into Albany, New York. And when you leave here, where's Richard Bourgeois? He has some shovels and spades outside the room. So if anyone wants to go and start digging, he'll hand them out. These concepts, a cap, a canal, a boulevard, are not mutually exclusive. The best design may actually incorporate elements of all 3. For each idea builds on different perspectives and priorities, from water management and environmental health to recreation to economic development. And we are committed to having community input as this study unfolds. And that's one of the reasons why we're generating your interest today and coming here to learn more about what our plan entails. We were formed to express a concept and to generate community input beneficial to those who are retained by the state of New York to study this. That will be engineers and landscape designers, and they are going to conduct a feasibility study to determine the engineering, social, economic, and environmental impacts of various proposals. And as anyone who's been around me knows, we are intense, we are focused, we are unwaveringly optimistic, and we have a clear vision for the future. To put this in perspective, I was with Brian Stratton, who's the head of the Canal Corp. He may be here today. And he had a book, and I took a picture of it, of this particular page of it, which basically says, as we approach the 200th anniversary of the opening of the Erie Canal, it is appropriate that we are reminded of the courage and vision it took to undertake this momentous effort. Rejected by President Jefferson as, quote, a little short of madness, the idea of a 350-mile canal through largely uncharted wilderness took enormous courage to believe in. And with little experience, a small group of men 200 years ago were able to complete an engineering feat that reshaped American economics and culture. Our comprehensive of the canal builders' faith in their unproven abilities and methodology for success stands as an inspiration for future generations. And what we now know is that because of the Erie Canal, Albany became an important city in America, an important seaport in America, And for the first time, this New York was known as the Empire State. It was that transformative. When I think about this, I think about President Kennedy, and what he said at one point was, "We choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard." And that's how I feel we are today. So let us begin. How did we get here besides Pat Fahey? There were three influences. One of them, I watched the 2021 Women's Final Four basketball tournament that was in San Antonio, Texas. And what I noticed was that people who were attending this were walking along a river walk, and they were enjoying themselves, and it was a really nice vibe, and it looked like it was safe, and there was a lot of energy, and a lot was going on there, and that just stuck in my head. The second thing, annually, as many of you know, I ride the Erie Canal on my bicycle from Buffalo to Albany. Joined one year by Pat Fahey, who I couldn't keep up with. You know she can talk? In any event, what we observed along that were all these towns and villages, Brockport, Pittsford, Fairport, Seneca Falls. There was so much energy that water brought to these towns in upstate New York, and that stuck with me. And the third influence is, in one of my lives, I chaired the USS Slater. It's the largest visitors attraction in Albany. We have 20,000 visitors a year. And when I'm aboard, they will ask, where can we walk to get lunch? Where can we walk to get a cup of coffee? And the answer, unfortunately, is nowhere. So I recalled my North Star on a lot of private development issues was an individual named Lou Swire. Wow. Some of you may remember Lou Swire. He built Stuyvesant Plaza. He built One Commerce Plaza. He was our client. He built the building where my office is. And one day he said, on the most important corner in the capital city of the Empire State, State Street and Pearl Street, there's a Neva roast beef and Steve Cleary's client, the Arthur Murdy Dance Studio. I think that ought to come down, and we're going to build 80 State Street. And so today, when you're downtown Albany, 80 State Street, which is a magnificent modern building, sits there. And again, he's an individual with great vision, and I think illustrates how important it is to have private development connected to public monies in order to have a public-private partnership on a lot of issues, certainly ours. I think connected with Lynn Tantillo, the genius who you're going to hear in a moment, with Chet Opalka, who's here, with his wife Karen, and Paul Grondell from the Writers Institute, and then others who are here. Marcus is here today, Eric's here today, and there are others here today. We formed a not-for-profit. We've applied for tax-exempt status. Volunteers from the Slater created our website and a Facebook page. If you haven't been there, in the document you picked up on the way in, there's a site to it, so please take a look at that when you get a chance. And we've connected with the community and with policymakers as much as we can through meetings. And then we studied other cities. I think the clearest for you to think about is Buffalo with Canalside, which is a booming operation that goes 365 days a year. It's going night and day. They skate on in the wintertime. They have a lot of things going on there. It's revitalized an industrial area in downtown Buffalo. And also we went and looked at Providence, where, if you can believe it, this is Kathy Costello-Eckhart and her husband, Tim. It's great to be together, Kath. And in Providence here, in this city that used to be sort of the pits of the Northeast, the first thing you notice is there's a gondola with a gondolier on it, inviting people to ride along the river. They had to move an interstate, they had to move railroad tracks, they had to uncover a lot of things, and they made it happen. So we believe that what we're proposing here will create significant long-time employment, jobs, important jobs, meaningful jobs. Economic revitalization, we believe it will attract private developers to build affordable housing and retail businesses and restaurants, and it will be consistent with the other proposed several other proposed downtown revitalization efforts led by Mayor Sheehan, for which we're most appreciative. So with that, I'm going to introduce Lynn Tantillo. I told her it wouldn't take more than 10 minutes. Have you ever met anybody with 2 honorary degrees? Lynn is a graduate of Rhode Island School of Design. He is a licensed architect, but he really hasn't practiced since 1986 because he got involved with a career in the fine art of historical and marine painting. You'll see a lot of his work here today. He's appeared internationally in exhibitions, publications, documents. Did I say he had 2 honorary degrees? He's a fellow of the American Society of Marine Artists, and he has produced over 300 paintings and drawings of New York State history. Some of you have seen these before. He was also elected as a fellow of the American Academy of History, and with that, I give you Lynn Tantillo.
I wanted to begin this afternoon by mentioning the fact that I have 2 honorary degrees, in case you didn't, maybe you didn't get that part. Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to see friends here and people who are interested in the city. It's great to have the mayor with us. It's great to have Pat Fahey with us, and I thank you all for coming. What we're going to do, can we have the lights down a little bit?
Hey, Len, John McDonald's here too.
Oh, John McDonald is here as well. Sorry, yeah. And I think our board is most of our board is here as well. And I think it's important to know that we've all been working on this project together as volunteers, and we've been at it for now a little over a year. And it's been wonderful working with a group of dedicated, like-minded friends. So today, could we have it a little darker? That's good, I think. I'm going to show you a series of maps of Albany. This one was drawn in 1632 by a Dutch cartographer who visited this area, and this is an incredible map. It's on linen, and it's here in the museum. It's in the archive, and every once in a while it will be taken out of storage and made available to the public. It's an incredible map. It has many details, but probably the most interesting, notable feature is the fact that it shows Fort Orange and the location of Fort Orange. I've used this map for reference for a number of works. Maps are kind of one of the basic things that I use graphically to determine what a historic site looks like, but I would get nowhere without the input of historians and the network of historians, one of whom is here today, Charlie Gehring, who've translated the documents from this time period. This is a painting that I made some years ago of Fort Orange in Albany. I've painted this subject many times over the years. This is the most recent painting. It's not a very large painting, but in this painting you get a sense of the nature of the community of what becomes Beverwyck a few years later. This is a map of Albany that was drawn by a British engineer. His name was Wolfgang Romer. He was a colonel in the British Army. The map was drawn in the late 1600s. It's a terrific map. This map is extremely accurate. You can take this map and lay it on top of a current map of Albany, and the streets that are still there line up. This is a drawing that I made from that map, from the Romer map. We're going to be looking at this again a little bit later, but the Dutch fort is not in this picture. It would be off to the left, but the English fort is there at the top of the hill, and that's the location of the lawn in front of the New York State Capitol building. This is a map that was drawn in the 1750s. Again, another British engineer. This is a wonderful map, lots of information, and this map was very helpful in a painting that I did that was commissioned by Don and Ann Eberly and then donated to the Albany Institute of History and Art. It's a painting that shows Albany's waterfront, and the view is from the Rensselaer side of the river, and it depicts the arrival of the provincial governor to the city in 1748. Again, a map of Albany, this time 1770s, near the time of the Revolution, and I use this and a whole bunch of other sources to make the largest painting that I ever painted. It's this view of Albany. It's called The Return of the Experiment, but you see the city here as it may have appeared in the 1780s. Again, another map, Albany, 1850s, and this map was a big help and a major input in the painting that I made of Albany around the 1860 time period. So why have I shown you all these? I mean, what do all these maps have in common? They have something in common that contemporary Albany doesn't have anymore, and that is that shoreline, that distinct bow-shaped shoreline that was so much a part of the development of the city through a time when trade was conducted mostly on waterways. That particular feature just resonated with me. It kind of remained in the back of my mind through the entire time I was creating those works, and had played a role in our project. So this project began 25 years ago. At that time, I'd been collecting various proposals that were being made for Albany, and there were several of them. Some of them were funded a little bit better than others. Some of them were fairly modest, and some of them were very ambitious. The one thing that they had in common is that they never got completely carried out. And that could have been because of the economic constraints of the time, or that these projects were just a little bit too unrealistic to ever pull off, especially back then. They also had another thing in common. A tremendous effort was being made to try to move the city closer to the Hudson River. And what struck me is that you could reverse that process. You could try to bring, instead of the city to the waterfront back into the city, actually very near where it was all those years ago. So with that in mind, I started to tell my friends about an idea that I had. And we would meet maybe for lunch somewhere, and I'd make a sketch on a napkin or whatever. I'd show the river. I'd show how a waterway could begin, a canal could begin by coming under the highway in a location where you could get under the highway, traverse Broadway, and then make its way back out to the Hudson River also by getting under the highway in a location where that was possible. This idea was picked up by the Times-Union, and for a while it made headlines here in Albany. The mayor was interested, the governor was interested, the newspapers were interested, and so I was given a stipend to develop just the concept of this. And in order to do that, I asked a couple of my friends, Pat Mahoney, who was a civil engineer and a principal at Smith & Mahoney's engineering firm, if Pat would help me, Bruce Heiser, landscape architect, and Tiag Degarian, who was an urban planner at Pat Mahoney's office. Unfortunately, Pat has passed away, and so is Bruce Heiser. Tiag is not well, And so I'm the last of the four who worked on this project, and I almost feel like I owe a little bit to them to at least see this thing through, to see how far it will go. So together we worked, and we produced, I can't get this to go. Oh, there it goes. We produced this plan, and it was a dramatic plan. It shows the highway, the canal coming in at the south end of the city and making its way past the SUNY headquarters building, the plaza, and continuing north on Broadway, and then kind of meandering through a series of marinas and harbors down to finally pass Central Warehouse and the boat launch area, and then back into the Hudson River. One of the questions that came up, I mean, there were a number of things that came up, you know. We knew right from the start that what we needed most was a feasibility study. We had a concept, but we didn't really have a workable plan. We didn't know how much of this was possible and what the constraints might be. But one of the elements that was brought up at the time, I remember speaking to Charlie Gehring about this, was the archaeological aspect of this. If you ever got to a point where you could excavate that much of the city, what might you find? And Romer's map sort of suggests a possibility. At the foot of State Street and Broadway, which you can see here on this enlargement of Romer's map, is the old Dutch church. It was right in the middle of the street. I don't know how much of it is still there, but it's possible that there may be some remains of that building. It was an unusual building. It had a cupola, but it was right in the middle of the street. So what would happen if we were able to use this as a feature if we ever constructed the canal? I mean, it might be something that could sort of anchor State Street to the project itself. So this is just one of the many potential aspects of developing this project. I know that one of the things that I said to Charlie way back then was, what would the Dutch think of this canal idea? And you know what Charlie's answer was? They would have built it already. So here you see that earlier drawing, bird's eye view, and I don't know if this has a pointer or not, but at the top of the hill you can see the English Fort, and you can see State Street coming down the hill, and you can see where Broadway is that kind of runs parallel with the bottom of the image. And right there at the bottom of State Street is the Dutch church. That's the feature that we were talking about. So, like a lot of the projects, it gathered attention for a while, and then it gradually went away. But it never completely went away. There was enough interest, particularly in the media, and I'm speaking specifically of the Times-Union, that it seemed like on slow news days that would come up every once in a while, a Saturday afternoon, you know, they've got 3 stories about a lost cat, and they needed some, I'm sorry, Paul, for this, but they, they'd say, what about that canal idea? So there'd be another short piece that was written. And so the idea never really completely went away. And it went on long enough, and most recently resurrected by Churchill at the Times-Union, that it attracted the attention of Chet Opalka and B.J. Costello and a few others, and they approached me and said, you know what, we got to do something with this. In the meantime, both of those men had been talking this over within their circles of friends, and so So we decided, well, let's give it another go. Let's give it another try. Let's put a little bit of effort into this and see if we can push it. And in the meantime, funding was being allocated for projects for cities, medium cities the size of Albany, for some maritime waterfront potential projects. So we thought, well, maybe there could be something in there for a feasibility study that could determine what the possibilities were here. But in the meantime, so 25 years go by from the beginning of this project. But in those 25 years, a lot of things have been happening across the country. Things that are extremely noteworthy. Buffalo has developed a canal side project. It's been a tremendous success for that city. The Bricktown Canal in Oklahoma City was built within that time period. It's a canal, a very modest canal, but it works its way through the city, and it's attracted a lot of visitors and generated a lot of revenue. Providence, Rhode Island is probably better known. Providence's canal has become one of the premier canal projects in the United States. These are just different views of the Providence Canal. I went to school in Providence, and in 1965, when I started school there, the most distinct thing that was happening in the city was they were filling in the canal and making it into a parking lot. So I'm shocked that the years have gone by and the parking lot was removed and the canal was put back. Water Fire in Providence, an annual event. I included a canal from Canada, the Rideau Canal, and it's a beautiful canal, but one of the reasons why I think this is such an interesting project, interesting amenity, is that the Canadians know how to use these projects year-round. This is the Ottawa Canal at Christmas time, and this is what they do on the canal in the winter. It gets a tremendous amount of use, and this idea has spread to other canals. So in Buffalo, in winter, they skate on their canal side project. Probably nationally, a canal project that's familiar to most people is the San Antonio Riverwalk. A lot of people from this area have been there. They've remarked about how much fun it is, how picturesque it is. I think it's become one of the premier attractions in San Antonio alongside the Alamo. Here's another view of the San Antonio Canal, and then maybe one of the oldest and probably most well-known, the Chicago Ship Canal. It's one of several canals in Chicago. So these beautiful projects inspired us, and I know inspire many, many, many thousands of people. For contrast, I want to bring you back to reality. This is Central Warehouse. You probably know that. And one thing that you can say about it, people have said a lot of things about it, but one thing you can say about it is it doesn't get better as you get closer to it. And it's tremendously well built. It's not the kind of building that's going to be easily taken down. So what do you do with something that's built to be here for centuries? Well, the interesting thing about it is I think the fact that it's structurally so sound it can be an advantage. The building is a slab and concrete column structure with infill. That means those infill panels can be taken out. And once you take those infill panels out, you have just this basic structure that you can do things with. You could infill it in an infinite number of ways. Here I've just done something relatively simple with it, maybe thinking of this kind of adaptation being used as some kind of residential, maybe apartments or something like that, commercial on the lower floors with offices. The building is so solid that I'm fairly certain that you can add onto it. And you might be able to develop something very distinct there. And maybe if you paid enough attention to the buildings, the contemporary buildings that have been built in Albany, you can come up with a solution that blends with that architecture. So we've been talking about the area around Central Warehouse. The interesting thing about that part of the city is that the Erie Canal began there. That's where Lock 1 was located. And when you study the lock and you study the facility around it, the lumber district, you can see that there was a sizable canal basin there. And as part of that facility, boats would come in from the Hudson River, they would go into the Albany Basin Harbor, they'd go through Lock 1, they'd go into the basin, and they would wade in the basin to be weighed. They'd make their way through the waylock and then back out through the lumber district. Well, one of the things we noticed all those years ago, back in the 90s, was that you could resurrect the lock and you could resurrect the canal basin in front of the Central Warehouse building. You could come in from the river, you could go under the highway, and right into that basin as it was once used. And possibly, changing this somewhat unimpressive urban area, you could transform this place into maybe something like that. With a marina, possibly because this building is located not far from a neighborhood, there might be neighborhood facilities there, a civic center, pavilions for family get-togethers, anniversaries. There'd be enough space around it for craft fairs and farmers markets and that kind of stuff. And that's what is being explained here in this diagram. So it's something to definitely, I think, take seriously and think about. This could be completely revitalized. And if it was, the experience, instead of being this, might be something like that, something to be inside and to be enjoyed in that way. So that all sort of relates to kind of building the whole canal. And that was something that would always come up. How could you possibly build anything on that scale? It would be one of the largest construction projects in North America. And what we said right from the beginning is there are options to this. There are different ways that you could approach this project. You don't have to build it all at once. There are different ways of getting the effect out of it without completing the whole thing. So this was an option to come in from the river, come into the marina or harbor in front of the SUNY Plaza building, and this would have a sizable impact on downtown right from the start. So I was trying to come up with some way to convey that to you today of exactly what that might be like. You have this, it seems like the resource for something like this is already there. The D&H building, or the SUNY headquarters building, the Gothic structure, that Gothic building is probably the most iconic piece of urban architecture in this entire part of the country. It's a beautiful building, and you can't help but notice that it's reaching out these arms to kind of embrace something. And I'm thinking that would be an incredible way to enhance that building and take advantage of a space that really is very underutilized now. every time I've ever been through there, and unless there's some event taking place, it looks like that. It's just this kind of open, unused urban area. And so what I could see for this space, and what our group can see for this space, is that you can modify it to be something very, very different for the city. A place that people would want to go, would want to bring their friends to. I don't own a boat, and I can't swim, but I do like to sit at a table with friends and drink a glass of wine, and that's what I would do if this place ever existed. And I can't imagine myself sitting there having a glass of wine the way it is now. I mean, I can drink in my car, but that is the second option to building the whole, the second option in addition to building something near the central warehouse facility. The third option is that lock, the Erie Canal lock, Lock 1. Even 25 years ago, we were fairly convinced that that was something that could be excavated and restored. This is the lumber district. I mean, this was a big part of the Albany economy in the 19th century. And you can see the part that how the lock and the basin work. And we have many, many drawings, scale drawings of that facility. And one of the reasons for that is it survived so long. These are Sanborn maps that show the lock. Where is the lock? Well, we're sort of looking down on Central Warehouse and the highway and the river, and the building, the flat building you see in that image is Modern Press. If you've been over there, you know where that is. That's the location of the lock. And how do we know the lock is there? In 2002, someone took a shovel, Dennis Foley and an associate from Union College, and they dug down a few short feet, I mean like 2 feet down, and uncovered the top of the lock. So city records seem to indicate that this lock was buried, that it's actually under the road. We don't know for sure, but with a little bit of research, it could be determined that the lock might be there. This is the lock that dates from the days of the Erie Canal, this beautiful lock with all these curvilinear forms. So just to kind of give you an overview, a conceptual view, there's Modern Press, Central Warehouse. That's the location of the lock. You can see its access is pretty clear to the river and to a possible basin. And so one of the suggestions that we made from the beginning and that we're making today is that that lock could be unearthed and maybe turned into a park. Maybe not necessarily connected to a whole canal system, but just resurrected as a historic site. I think it would make a great attraction, and I think it's important to note that the Erie Canal was completed in 1825. There's a bicentennial coming up in 2 years, 2025, the bicentennial of the Erie Canal. What more fitting project could there be than to try to excavate this lock, Lock 1 of the Erie Canal? So here we have Albany today, with all its great potential, and with all its wonderful people, and with all the great opportunities that are here. And we are living in an area that has this past, this incredible shoreline. What are we going to do with it? I mean, is there a way that we can do something with it? And so I thought I would close my program today with this painting that I made of the D&H building 25 years ago with the canal in front of it. And I wanted to kind of, I thank Susanna for this. A couple of years ago, I put a book together called A Sense of Time, and I wrote in it that we live in these polarized times. We live in a time when the country is greatly divided. We seem to always be on two sides of everything, which is, I think, kind of sad. But we do have something in common as the air we breathe and the water we see and the water we drink. And that thing that we have in common is history. And if we can do something with our past, we can do something with our future. So thank you.
How great was that? So we were plotting and conspiring on this particular set of things that you've seen, and somebody asked, is this even feasible to do? I mean, has anybody ever done this before? And fortunately, one of our group was in New York City at a dinner, sitting next to a woman, and telling her about how excited he was about it, and she said, oh, you can do that. I've done that. I've done it a number of places. And that woman was Susanna Drake, who's going to be our next speaker. And we are so excited that she came here today from Brooklyn on the way to Vermont. She's a Vermonter like some of us are Vermonters, you know. Okay.
Don't hold it against her.
Yeah. So Susanna is a principal of an internationally known firm called Sasaki. She's received a number of national and international awards. She specializes in complex interdisciplinary projects that require synthesized, analytical, research-based appraisal. Her mother wrote that. She's done a lot of large-scale projects that you're going to see in a minute. She's lectures globally at Harvard, Syracuse, Washington, Sao Paulo, a number of other places, including Colorado and the Boulder program. Her writings and her works on climate adaptation and infrastructure are published in a number of different things, and her next book coming out is going to be called The Gowanus Sponge Park, which she will talk about here, to be published early next year. Most recently, she unveiled a bold plan entitled History Secured for how to protect and preserve culture and the ecological assets of the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And with that, it is my distinct privilege to introduce to you Susanna Drake.
Let's see, I have to just get this queued up.
Did you sit down?
Maybe, let's see, I think I've got it.
Yeah, whatever one you want to do, just double click on it.
There we go.
And then start your show the way you would, like
Right.
hit the
I
screen
go-
over there. Yeah, wherever.
This puppy.
Yep.
There we go. Magic. All right, here we are. So somehow I missed in the last presentation that you gave that the map was created by a roamer. Because my family are roamers. My grandmother is Eliza Romer, or my great-grandmother is Eliza Romer. And I even have I know, and our family were engineers, so I thought, oh, wow, so amazing. So it's like, oh, gave me chills. Anyway, I'm just thrilled to be here, and I want to thank sorry, I guess discombobulated, member of the Assembly, Pat Fahey, for making this all possible again, and also thank the Albany Waterway group for being so generous and inviting me up to speak to you today. As BJ suggested, my name is Susanna Drake. I'm an architect and a landscape architect. I'm the principal, or one of the principals at Sasaki. We're a pretty big firm. We have 350 people in offices in Boston and New York and Denver and soon to be LA and Shanghai. And we have people across disciplines. We have civil engineers, we have software engineers, we have planners, sustainability planners, landscape architects like me, architects, interior designers, urban designers, graphic designers, and data analysts all working together. And it's really exciting, and it's kind of the first time in my professional practice that because I joined the firm relatively recently, that I've been able to kind of work across disciplines in a very synthetic way. So together we hail from 30 countries and speak 45 languages, and we're almost 60% women. So, yeah, it's kind of exciting. And we allowed our varied and collective experiences to shape our approach to work and our process and our design ethos. As I suggested, we have a civic practice that kind of works across all of these disciplines, and part of the beauty of that is that it means that we can mobilize all of these different groups to work collaboratively fairly easily, and it's exciting. So there's a unique and dynamic opportunity in coupling of design, nature, culture, and infrastructure at a grand civic scale. And as we confront the myriad challenges cities face, our process is rooted in feasibility and invention. So we know resilient waterfronts. There's an opportunity to fashion a narrative around water, around ecology, environment, and lessons through history. One that celebrates the inherent beauty and function of a waterway, one that supports a multifaceted resilience. And this is our project in Cincinnati for the Smale waterfront. So we understand and embrace the complexities of change. This is actually Chicago. When we talk about change, we mean honoring a history, embracing challenges of the present, and collaborating to reimagine a future. And we believe engagement should be at the core of that process, from which an entire design process emerges. And for us, engagement is not merely a quick phase of an overall design process, but an ongoing conversation that's woven into all aspects of design. I tend to form a really strong personal connection with the people in the places that I work and the place itself. So we speak a language of transformation. So for today's presentation and discussion, we have chosen to do two things, to embrace and advance a call to action, and to tell stories of transformation driven by our work, driven by our clients and relationships, by the dedication of agencies and elected officials, and by the collective public voice, and that parallel Albany's opportunity to make a transformative mark on the landscape. So, and just as an example of this, I have two slides here. So in New York City, I worked with the Design Trust for Public Space, which was a community organization, partnered with the New York City Department of Transportation to develop prototypical installations for spaces under elevated infrastructure. So we have experience with many types of infrastructure systems, but I just wanted to point this out because we explored 666 miles of different kinds of space underneath elevated structures. And then we also know resilient waterfronts. So we know how to plan, envision, and build resilient waterfronts that confront climate change impacts, address historic industrial pollution, and reduce the pestilence of ongoing combined sewer overflows. That one was for you, Mayor. So we're inspired by the work you've done so far, and want to build upon your ideas. The arc of our story and the arc of our design starts in the middle. So much work has already been done, and we recognize and celebrate your preliminary vision, how it's rooted and shaped by history, how it recognizes natural forces, how it engages the downtown, and how it recognizes the people and human forces that shaped the place. So I took this map that you created, this beautiful drawing, and I just doodled over it. And I thought it was important to highlight that water has been in the city. So we have water at the edge, but we also have water in. And we probably, that water is probably flowing through pipes right now, and flowing into combined sewer system in Albany. So keep that in mind for later. So A new pier that protected the harbor created a kind of threshold condition for the Erie Canal and a more regularized, rectangularized street grid that grew on the upper plateau. So you can see the difference between a relationship to the water's edge, which was kind of curved, and then something that was more regularized on the upper plateau. And then the confluence of Broadway and State Street. So if you look back at that map we saw before, there was a stream coming down State Street and meeting at Broadway. So I'm just drawing these little doodles in to show this kind of overlay of water on the history and ultimately thinking about the relationship of the Hudson to the city and how that existed in the past and might come back in the future. And I was thinking about this quote by from Toni Morrison. It says, "All water has perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was." I just want to say it again. All water has perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. If you look at this blue area on this map, that's the floodplain. And if we think about the maps that Len shared with us, we saw that the water used to flow in a different pattern than it flows now, and that we've created this edge. But that water is kind of fighting back and wants to come back. So we need to think about that. And we need to think also about the streams that were buried and still flow, increased rainfall intensity that's causing flooding. And, it's natural to consider bringing the water back into the city. So our team has the track record and experience to make this happen in a way that can improve the economy, ecology, and cultural vibrancy of the city. So, excuse me, a little sniffly. So the weather change. So we have three themes emerged from our initial research and conversations, and I'll share some initial impressions and then some ideas or some case studies that relate to each of these three themes. So exploring includes a dive into history. Healing describes methods for repair and revitalization of neighborhoods scarred by infrastructure. And then connecting is about bringing people together, cultural and natural pathways that enliven the city and the waterfront. So this first project is in Washington, D.C., and I think BJ referenced this at the end of my bio. So we, in the 1800s, the Hudson River School represented the power and the beauty of nature. And while this painting of the Connecticut is of the Connecticut River, not the Hudson River, it wasn't called the Connecticut River School. It was called the Hudson River School. And I used that joke last time, but I think it's important, right? Because it isn't the Connecticut River School. I grew up on the Connecticut, and it's not quite as majestic as the Hudson. So it's one of the most iconic images of this period, though, and an inspiration for our work in Washington, D.C., and certainly inspiration for the tidal basin. So the tidal basin, for the canal waterway. So the tidal basin in Washington, D.C. Is the site of the beloved cherry trees. They ring this tidal basin. It's very beautiful. Millions of people visit. And the problem is that these millions of people visit and they all come at the same time and they compact the roots of the trees. But that's not really the main reason that we were brought in to study it. This was a really big issue, that not only are these poor trees getting their roots compacted, but they're also getting flooded. And Washington, D.C. was literally a swamp, and the water's coming back. And it's really coming back. And this is our nation's capital. This symbolic landscape is becoming a symbol of inaction. So nature is indeed very powerful, and this is why we were asked to envision a new future for the tidal basin area of the National Mall in Washington, D.C. So I did a little historical research on the hydrology of the area, and I found that the 1793 water line and the projected water line of 2019 pretty much matched. So again, think back to Toni Morrison's quote. So the research revealed that these lines matched, and then I also had my students, when I was teaching out at CU Boulder, do an analysis of the watershed of the surrounding area, and we found that since 1950, that 15% of the Potomac waterfront or watershed, has been paved. So the impact of our highway infrastructure is not just creating the highways, but also creating all the development that relates to those highways, which paved all of that area and paved all those former farms and kind of drained our cities. So all of that is contributing to the flooding in Washington. So here the area is filled with memorials, in addition to the beloved cherry trees, and that brings in legions of visitors to the city. And this is really why we can't ignore the problem, because all of those memorials and all of those cherry trees are going to be underwater. So our project sought to secure, connect, and absorb. So we want to secure the important historic resources from flooding and terrorist threats, and secure pedestrian and bicycle safety, absorb stormwater and also the large crowds of the cherry blossom festivals, connect important monuments, and repair some of the sight lines which were not able to be constructed as envisioned by L'Enfant or the Macmillan Plan because of some of the geotechnical considerations. Sorry, I'm fiddling with my mouse. And then we transformed this landscape to make safer physical, environmental, cultural connections, absorbing larger crowds and stormwater, and connecting landmarks in meaningful ways. So we wanted to create the revitalization of this historic public space, bringing people down to the waterfront, relocate and elevate the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial on a new jetty on the axis with the mall, looking west. So he's got Lincoln behind him, looking west instead of looking back at Jefferson. And then we're nothing if not provocative. And then the design involved significant but sensitive engineering. In this case, the highway is buried to create connections that symbolically and physically connect people, the monuments, and the city as a whole. The work adds new open space to accommodate or absorb more people, and it also enhances security with protection from flooding, automobile pedestrian conflict, and terrorist threats, because it's Washington, D.C. So this is this elevated jetty creating new important public spaces for gathering. And then we also created sort of new connections between the mall and the Jefferson Memorial. So this is an elevated cherry alley. The water can come in through the Potomac and thread through the city in much the way that we're proposing here in Albany. But it importantly creates this important axis, strengthens the axis between the Jefferson Memorial and the Washington Memorial. And the elevating of that ground protects it from flooding. And we also envisioned new swimmable waters for the city. And it's funny, we were doing this research, and apparently there was a big controversy because the ladies' bathing suits had to be a certain length from their knee, and they would go and measure the distance, and if it was too high, you wouldn't be able to swim. But anyway, so it was sort of fun doing that research. But in a country that prides itself on the majesty of its natural landscapes, the National Mall represents a coupling of nature, culture, and designed intervention at a grand civic scale. Overall, that framework is static. However, it is shown to be flexible in accepting and representing changing attitudes about the meaning and the nature of democracy. So this next project, I'll say, heals wounds of industrial highway infrastructure. And we feel that we can harness the power of natural systems to engage in that transformation. So here's our city. So this lowland former industrial area reflects mid-century shift from localized industry and waterfront commerce to a kind of car, truck-centered, containerized, shipping-centered form of exchange. And unfortunately, that left a lot of this space kind of, let's just say, latent and ready for change. So we want to heal the wounds of infrastructure. This is actually Gowanus Bay. So going back to Brooklyn, I'm going to talk about a project that I spent, a couple decades working on. This is the Gowanus, sort of as it's gone through this transformation from a swamp into farmland, into an industrial neighborhood and then into a post-industrial neighborhood. So the area was filled for industry, and then the industry left, and now it's this kind of contaminated post-industrial landscape. So, and it's basically this derelict landscape that we were presented with when we started working on the project a couple decades ago. So it's also an EPA Superfund site, and it became the site of our work on a series of projects from master planning to a pilot stormwater infrastructure project to the design for private developers and a large public park. And I think that's important in the context of what we're talking about here, because it hasn't been just one big master planned project that has happened. It's happened in bits and incremental pieces, but it did start with a master plan. So I was thinking about the reason it's called the Sponge Park is I didn't want to go into the neighborhood and say, I'm going to put bioswales and wetlands in your backyard, because people would not have liked that, right? So I thought we need something that talks about the performance of the landscape, and what's more evocative than a sponge? A sponge absorbs water, and it does that in the same way that like landscape, when built properly, can absorb a lot of water. So we came up with this overall idea for this urban stitch, and at the time, city planning was proposing to create a waterfront esplanade directly adjacent to the canal, but there were a lot of old industrial buildings that were really cool that abutted the canal, and I thought, well, it'd be a shame to take those buildings down just to build this esplanade, only to have high-end residential projects go in that don't reflect the character of the place. So we thought, let's try to enrich the whole neighborhood and provide benefits that also absorb more of that stormwater. So the idea with the urban stitch was that there could be these green fingers that knit back into the neighborhood and create a whole green district instead of just a fancy edge. So we calculated the amount of water going down the streets, and so I thought about where to do a first pilot project for an initial prototype. And it's pretty complicated doing work on these waterfronts, and I just want to spend a little bit of time on this slide because it's important to understand that, like the first, underneath the canal, that sediment is controlled by the EPA Superfund. It's a navigable waterway, so you have to interface with the Army Corps of Engineers. The first 5 feet of soil in the upland area is controlled by the Department of Environmental Conservation, the state agency, because it's a brownfield. All the green on the surface is controlled by the Parks Department. All the water that's flowing over the ground is controlled by the Department of Environmental Protection, city agency. The landowner is technically, for the streets, is technically the Department of Transportation, but the sidewalks are technically owned by the building owners. They have to maintain them, but then the DOT still has some controls over that. All these street ends, you have to maintain access for fire trucks and access for sanitation trucks, of course, right? But then there are also these additional regulations that city planning put in place that regulate the amount of seating that you have in the waterfront zones and the amount of tree canopy, and that the seating actually has to be social seating. So you may have to have your seats so that they're, they can't just be benches. You have to have seats that look at one another. And then even something like putting a little balcony out over the water, which seems like a really nice feature, that's controlled by or administered or regulated, I should say, by the Department of Environmental Conservation, the state agency, because it has an impact on habitat. So it's challenging. There are about 200 permits you have to get for any one project. And meanwhile, this was this tiny pilot project. It was this, $2 million pilot to do a street end project. But we paid for it all with grants. I wrote a lot of grants. The advantage of having a liberal arts education, kids in the room, is that you know how to write, and then you can write proposals to get money to do the things you want to do. And so we built this pilot, and I'm going to show you next a video. Hopefully I can figure out how to make this run. Maybe it'll just go. No, I don't think it'll just go. I think if I click on it, there we go. So this is the existing condition. So there are these there were these green spaces, and please just keep baby inside, because maybe they'll like the moving things on the screen. So there are these street swales that we put in that would allow the water that's coming down the street to flow into them, and then these bioretention cells at the end of the street that could capture stormwater. We put in an integrated sidewalk sedimentation basin to catch all of the grit and there's a lot of crud that flows down the street, technical term crud. And then this pedestrian path with a sand filter underneath, and then thank goodness there was an existing drain. It was an old wooden pipe, but it existed, so we just tied into some version of it, but if we hadn't, it would have been another permit. It probably would have taken about a year. So anyway, so the water flows down the street and it goes into this sedimentation basin, and then it's distributed into these planting zones, which then absorb that water and make it available to the plants. So the soil is doing work for us and the plants are doing work for us. So the plants are ultimately going to absorb it and evapotranspirate. The soils have microorganisms that are helping to absorb some of the biological toxins. If there's too much rain, the rainfall goes into the sand filter and then flows into the canal. So, and ultimately our idea was that this green infrastructure should also be about public, that it becomes a public space. It's a boat access point. It's designed for people, and babies really don't bother me at all. No, I have 3, so they're in college now, but anyway, it becomes this important public space for the city. Oh, somebody's getting fussy. Okay. Oh, no. And this is the BUILT project. So this was a pilot, and the idea with this was that it would be a replicable project that could then be installed on all the other street ends. Other things that happened after the construction of this pilot involved the development of this public park, which tied into our original master plan. It's on top of sewage infrastructure, so these big holding tanks in Gowanus. And so we had to figure out a way to kind of both mask and celebrate that. We kind of wanted to make it this beautiful public park, but we also didn't want to hide the fact that it was also an important piece of stormwater management infrastructure. So we created this new waterfront using various typologies or sort of methods to kind of make it blend into the neighborhood to create this new waterfront. So then the last project I want to talk about is probably the most significant in terms of the relationship to what we're doing here. So Connect, within infrastructure's margins, there are great opportunities to activate unrealized connections, kind of thinking about a civic recentering. So we can certainly think about that here. I showed this image of the USS Slater to highlight what BJ was talking about before, that you have this incredible resource that is visited a lot, but it could be, it's not the kind of connector or economic generator that it could be for the city. So this project that I want to talk about is in Chicago. So we designed the waterfront or the revitalization of the waterfront in Chicago. So it's a recasting of an industrial area and underutilized waterfront into a bustling urban destination through a feat of design and engineering. The main branch of the Chicago River has a long and storied history that in many ways mirrors the development of Chicago itself. Once a meandering marshy stream, the river first became an engineered channel to support industrial transformation of the city, and following the famed reversal of the river, so they changed the direction of the flow of the river, the main branch and the south branch to improve sanitation, architect and urban planner Daniel Burnham introduced a new civic vision of riverside promenades with addition of Wacker Drive, the Wacker Drive Viaduct. So you'll remember Daniel Burnham is the one who said make no small plans. So here we are. Make no small plans in Albany. So over the last decade, the role of the river has been evolving with the Chicago Riverwalk project, an initiative to reclaim the Chicago River for the ecological, recreational, and economic benefit of the city. It is being done in phases. So Phase 3 and Phase 2 have been done, and Phase 1, it's sort of strange that that's happening that way, is now, it's kind of strange that it's happening backwards, but in any case, so the goal of embracing the river has, as a recreational amenity, seemed impossible for years, given the river's high level of pollution. But today, that vision is becoming a reality, and recent improvements in river water quality and the increased intensity of public recreational use signal growing life along the river, demanding new connections to the water's edge. Heeding this call, the Chicago Department of Transportation led the construction of the Chicago Riverwalk, completing portions of the system that include very successful new spaces like, Veterans Memorial Plaza and Wabash Plaza. So here you can see the edge. There's a kind of 25-foot build-out line or limit. So the task at hand was quite technically challenging because we could only build out to that 25-foot line to expand the pedestrian program spaces and negotiate a series of underbridge connections between the blocks. So further, the design had to account for the river's annual flood dynamics of nearly 7 vertical feet. So here's a view of what it looked like. You just saw the cross-section with a lot of the technical material. Actually, one thing to keep in mind is that the upper elevation, Upper Wacker Drive, is much higher. There's a whole series of staircases and ways to get down to the water's edge. So, and then that's the existing waterfront, and this is it during construction. So you can see it wasn't just a sort of simple thing to build out into the water. In 2012, Sasaki, Ross Barney Architects, Alfred Benish Engineers, Jacob Ryan Associates, and a broader consultant team was tasked with creating a vision for 6 blocks between State Street and Lake Street. Now, I bring up the broader team because these projects tend to be done by larger interdisciplinary groups, and that's really important because each voice is critical to the development. So building off previous studies of the river, the team's plans provided a pedestrian connection along the river between the lake and the river's confluence. The project was implemented in phases through a federal TIFIA loan, T-I-F-I-A loan of $100 million to be paid back over 30 years. And because of the unprecedented success, the city was on track to pay that loan back well ahead of schedule. So turning these challenges into opportunities, the team imagined new ways of thinking about this linear park rather than a path composed of 90-degree turns. The team reconceived the path as a more independent system, one that through changes in its shape and form would drive a series of programmatic connections to the river. So there are a series of spaces that I'm going to describe. This one is the River Theater. It's a sculptural staircase linking Upper Wacker and the Riverwalk, and it offers pedestrians connectivity to the water's edge and seating, while trees provided greenery and shade. Believe it or not, it's winter in that picture, so you can't really see the trees, but there's trees integrated into that large slope. So this Marina Plaza, where restaurants and outdoor seating provide views of the vibrant life on the water, including passing barges, patrols, water taxis, and sightseeing boats. And it's so, I went there this summer. I was like, it's so fun. And then some of the key considerations included creating ecologically focused zones in an otherwise urban area. So really giving people access to these ecological zones. This one is called the Jetty, and it includes a series of piers and floating wetland gardens that offer an interactive learning experience about ecology and the river, including opportunities for fishing and identifying native plants. And then this one was really fun, and this happens. This isn't just a staged photo. So the cove is inspired by beach landscapes, and the flat concrete benches are reminiscent of beach stones. And while the planting concept was beach grasses and wetland plants, the near edge and trees with woodland ferns, these are on the corners, sort of create these little alcoves for the boats. So, and then An accessible walkway and new marine edges create continuous access to Lake Street and sets a scene for future development in this critical space at the confluence. So, I think there have been some comments about, well, what do we do when it floods? Well, we kind of plan for when it's going to flood, not if it's going to flood. So this project was designed so that all that water could come in and then go out. And it's designed for resilience. It's designed to be able to withstand that. So the park can open 12 hours after a flood like this, based on our design. We generated a lot of revenue. We had, big numbers. Almost $50 million was spent 2 years after the opening, and the revenue was generated from a combination of new F&B, docking fees, advertisements, and programming. The financial success has allowed the city to reinvest in the community with public art, programming, and support for WMBE businesses. And here you can just see that since 2014, city revenues have generated 29% more revenue than expected. So it's kind of a remarkable success story. Here's a piece of that public art. $460,000 invested in public art just in 2018 alone. So it's really about ultimately connecting water to the people and people to the water. So the final phase of the ambitious initiative to reclaim the Chicago River waterfront for ecological, recreational, and economic benefits of the city, the Chicago River Walk project offers unity and diversity for this thriving city. So I'm just going to conclude with a couple of kind of more poetic comments about Albany. So the city's new arc of water, of activity, of business, and resilience with which to bookend and begin. So it's only fitting that there's a particular moment on I-90, a repeated experience now strung across decades of travel, when after nestled between highway embankments, the landscape opens up and the highway footprint widens. Now you're going to look next time you're on the highway. A look to the left, and there's a glimpse of the Empire State Plaza 3 miles away, punctuating the western bank of the Hudson. And in this moment, Albany is revealed. And the vision can pull from the horizon, a curated scene, a romantic notion of place. It's an idea that from afar, the first sight of a city is one of service, or for and by the people. But we are at the edge, here, beyond the bounds of downtown's story arc, distilling the place into parts. And from the interstate, still on the outside, looking in, we can't yet see a city's full portrait or its potential, its rich but complicated history, or the challenges that face so many communities. This vantage point on the edge scrubs things clean. But we believe Albany Canal to be in the middle of an arc of exploration, of healing, and of connectivity, rooted in the aspirational portrait of a city, new civic, common ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. So can this be done?
Yes. Yes. God damn it.
Just remember, 200 years ago, immigrants, as Brian Stratton reminds us, Brian, nice to have you with us today. As Brian reminds us, 200 years ago, immigrants with spades and shovels went up over 2 mountains, went across a Montezuma swamp, endured all kinds of hardship, had no modern facilities, and built the most transformative thing in the country, the Erie Canal, making us the Empire State. 350 miles. Do you think we could do a couple miles here in 2022? We're going to the next and final phase of our afternoon. I'm going to ask Pam Howard to come up, and Lynn and Suzanne, if you sit up front here, and Marcus and Paul, if you're still around, to assist us. We've got some index cards here, and we have some pencils, and if people have a question, feel free to raise your hand, and you'll get an index card and a pencil, and you can write it down and bring it on up here.
Sure.
There you go. So again, I just want to, while we're making this transition, I just want to thank you all for coming today. This has been it's a Saturday afternoon. I'm sure you got many other things to do, but the fact that you came here today is really heartwarming for us. Pam Howard, who is joining us, is the president and CEO of Historic Albany Foundation, which was founded here in Albany in 1974. And it was founded really to preserve architecture and to make sure that everything wasn't ripped down like happens in a lot of other cities. Since then, she has been a fierce, she hasn't been here since 1974. She wasn't even born then. But I was born. Yeah, okay. Since she has taken over, she's been a fierce proponent of preserving history as we know it here. And she's co-sponsoring our afternoon. And Pam, do you have any reflection on what you've seen here this afternoon?
Yeah, I think...
I think you got to be closer to your... Is it on?
Is my mic on? I think what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, I've also been very involved with the Albany Riverfront Collaborative. On Tuesday evening, there was a presentation from Capitalize Albany about the future of the Liberty Park area. And I think we have a huge opportunity in Albany. We're on the precipice of, I think, some real future greatness. And I think all of these organizations, if we all work together and come together and see what we can do, I think we can really make a huge impact on our present and our future here in the city.
Thank you. We have a couple of other guests here I'd like to recognize. John McDonald, who I omitted earlier. I'm sorry, John. This is a regional project that we have which will impact many of his constituents who come down from just north of the city. And also Jenny Farrell is here, who's on the Common Council, and she's been very supportive. Did I miss anybody else who is an elected person? We're always happy to have our presiding judge of the Appellate Division, Elizabeth Gary, here, who has always been very supportive of everything that we do here in Albany itself. So thank you for all of that. And if there are any questions, just raise your hand and we will get you an index card and a question. And we'll let Paul Grondell answer it.
I also love questions from kids. I see a couple in the audience.
Okay, so the question here is, Albany has, Hudson River is tidal, it's got a 4-foot tide, and how can that be accommodated? We'll ask Susanna to answer that.
Sure. I mean, it basically, you just design so that there's enough freeboard. So from when you design, you're designing for a height of the water's edge, or of the water in relation to the water's edge, right? So you need to have enough freeboard in the canal edge so that that water in the canal or that comes into the river doesn't overtop. And you want to plan for not just the regular 4-foot tidal difference. You want to plan for those king tides. You want to plan for when there's a full moon at the same time as a super high tide. You want to plan for kind of your worst case scenario in terms of the location or the design between the bulkhead edge and the water level. So it's just a design exploration that we would go through in designing the actual physical properties of the place. So.
Thank you, Susanna. And just one thing to keep in mind, there is a $5 million study that's going to happen on a lot of these engineering questions. So we have a design, we've got a thought about it, but it's not the final word, so we'll do our best here. The next question is, why is the entrance at the south when Lock 1 is at the north and the river flows north to south? It does? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's not really an entrance. There are entrances on both ends.
Yeah, it's open at both ends. So, I mean, if the canal was built, you'd be able to access it from either the north side or the south side. And this design considerations are going to absolutely have the effect of enhancing the plan that I showed in my presentation. I mean, we're talking about places along the way where the canal might widen out so that vessels can use it as a turning basin. We might do something like that. And also, kind of getting back to that first question about the height of the elevation of the water, one of the considerations that we've had is the idea of instituting operable locks at both ends of the system, which would raise the elevation of the water closer to street level, but that would be a fixed level. It would be 10 or 12 or 14 feet above the height of the river always. So that could be regulated, and that elevation could be maintained.
Thank you, Len. We've got quite a few questions here. The next one is, how many buildings will be impacted? How many might come down? How many might be torn down with this?
When we
The answer is
Yeah, I was going to say that.
0.
Yeah, when we started this project all those years ago, the four of us decided that there would be 2 constraints that we would honor. The first one was, do not disturb 787 at all. Don't change a ramp, don't interfere with the highway at all. That was our first consideration. Our second consideration was, don't tear a single building down. So what we worked around that, and in our original plan that you saw this afternoon, we were able to successfully accomplish that. Now, today, maybe because there's been some construction in Albany that occurred over the years, there might have to be some minor adjustments to the idea, but nothing significant if it was to be constructed that way. Do you want to add to it?
Well, actually, when we were working on the Gowanus Canal Sponge Park pilot project, we intentionally stayed a certain distance back from the canal's edge because we didn't want to open up the rat's nest of complications that were involved in interfacing with the EPA Superfund people, so we kept it back. And that was strategic, just so that we could build this first pilot project, because it was really much more about green infrastructure and managing combined sewer overflows than it was about having, some kind of softer edge leading to the canal. So but it was a strategic decision based on wanting to do a first pilot. And I think, so it's not that we didn't think that the canal should be improved ultimately, or that there might be places where there were softer edges, but we chose it as a very sort of strategic logistical decision. So.
Here's a good question, which I think was touched on by Susanna, who's all about community involvement. How will the area's residents be involved in decision-making so that the area remains affordable to existing residents? Good question. Any thoughts on that?
You want to?
Well, for one thing, the canal isn't really focused or centered on a heavily populated, identifiable community, except for the community of commercial buildings that are on Broadway. So I'm not sure what the ripple effect would be, kind of generating out from there. But I can't really, it's hard for me to imagine, if we're talking about the neighborhoods of South Albany or Arbor Hill, it's hard for me to imagine that the ripple effect would negatively impact those communities in a dramatic way. As soon as you move away from the water, I think property values tend to sort of stabilize again.
Well, and I have maybe a different way of thinking about it also from my experience in Gowanus, because Gowanus was an industrial area, so there wasn't really any housing there, or there wasn't a lot of housing there, at least in the blocks directly surrounding the canal. But the city just undertook a rezoning, and they called for certain percentages of affordable housing. So what they're trying to do is make it so that the neighborhood doesn't get just completely gentrified. They're trying to make, lots of opportunities for lots of different kinds of people to live there.
BJ, I want to add,
Incomes.
I'd like to add another thing. And that is, we don't know the answers to a lot of these questions. And this project all along has had one primary objective: to have a feasibility study done, a comprehensive feasibility study done that would address these issues and be able to identify what is possible and what is not possible, what would be a negative impact, what would be a positive impact, the advantages maybe to increased revenue or not. At this point, we have an idea. We don't know how much of it can even be implemented without having a feasibility study, and that's what you are about. That's why we embrace our friends, the friends of this group, because as we tend to grow in terms of the number of friends that we have, we tend to attract a bit more attention, and hopefully we'll get a piece of that feasibility study money to find out just where we stand with this project.
I think one of the most important things is that, and I don't mean to speak for the mayor on this, or Pat Fahey, or John McDonald, or my friends here from the Common Council, Jenny Farrell. It is important to them, and I think important to us, that this not be a top-down operation, that we get feedback from people who are impacted in the city of Albany and in the region. And what that means basically is holding a lot of listening sessions and getting input. There's a lot of projects going on in downtown on the planning board for downtown Albany. It's important that people in downtown Albany have a say in what that's going to be. And I think that's the most important thing we can do, because remember, we elect all of our public officials and they're here to listen, and they are willing to listen. They have listened, and I think whatever we can do to facilitate that, that's why we're all volunteers just hanging out trying to be cool, as Steve Killier would say, trying to be cool. You know, I will just point out, Steve, that when Susanna went to Dartmouth College, she found SMC on a couple of the trees. It might be your initials, just to point that out. But in any event, it's important for us to get public input and to find out what's going on, and not impose something. We're just a group of people. We're not elected, we're not appointed, we're not anything. One of the issues here is about regulatory stakeholders. How do you deal with regulatory stakeholders? I think Susanna, who said she had, 100? Some number in Gowanus. There's an ability to do that, and I think part of that is driving our elected leaders to continue to create forums where our bureaucracies understand what the goal of the project is, and that we continue to push toward those goals together. It's easy to raise roadblocks. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if you were trying to get to the moon in 1960? My grandmother, who was born before there was even an airplane, before the Wright brothers, she saw somebody walk on the moon. I mean, what, are you kidding me? I mean, how is that possible to do? And I think it's what President Kennedy said. We choose to do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And that's why we're doing this. We don't think there's an option for Albany. We have to move forward on this.
Actually, can I speak to that for
Sure.
just a second?
Sure.
Because I think one of the reasons that we made that diagram, that axonometric diagram that showed all the agency controls, was to kind of demystify that process, to demonstrate to both the public agencies that we knew what they controlled, what each of them controlled, but also to the public, so that the public would understand sort of the different layers of the process. So it was really, I think, important to reveal that. And then, for our elected officials, they could also then put pressure on particular agencies to act. So it was useful.
This is an interesting question. What, other than the church, what archaeological resources do you expect to find in the southern sections of the proposal? I'll just point out that where the Slater is, you know where that is? All of that, and where 787 is, most of that's filled in land. When they built the Empire State Plaza that we're sitting in, they hauled that stuff down to the river and dumped it. Some of it on top of Lock 1. But a lot of it along there. But then there is other space there, and I don't know if we have any idea. The oldest building in Albany is not too far from where this passes, right? On Hudson Avenue. So, Pam, I don't know if you have any other.
I think there's a lot of area downtown that has not been explored archaeologically, and this would be a perfect opportunity to be able to do that Normally, you're not just going to go and dig things up and inconvenience everyone. But if it's part of another project, then this would be the perfect time to be able to do that. Fort Orange was somewhat excavated. The area around Liberty Park, where we have the parking lots around 48 Hudson, that hasn't been completely looked at. So this would be an opportunity to be able to take that on.
Well, the other thing that we've done, I've done a lot of work in historic cemeteries, and and also on campuses that turned out to be historic cemeteries. We can use ground penetrating radar and kind of figure out what's down there before we start to dig as well. So we're not, hopefully not interrupting sensitive material that's underground.
This is a good question. Where are all the young people? And how do we get them involved?
Fact check.
Instagram.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, we got some young people here. Well, some of them today are competing in the state music competition, including our grandson.
Jay, I've seen your TikTok video, I know.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go, TikTok video. Believe me, that is on our radar. Young kids on a Saturday afternoon are not inclined to come to a place like this, but I can assure you that we've been discussing with them and will continue to involve them. It's a very good point you're making with this question, and we believe they are our future, so we will definitely stay involved with them. Question here, I suspect there's very few residents in Albany who own boats. Not even Lynn owns a boat. It seems that the focus should be on comfortable places to be outside, enjoy the water, shop, restaurants, and picnic, etc. Okay, I don't...
Cool. Well,
Great.
yeah, no, I think that, we were talking about that actually at lunch. Because for the Chicago project, there's a lot of kayak rental opportunity, and there are also these tour boats that go through. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be all boats all the time. It could be more varied.
No, the models that were shown of the Albany project, I could have spent more time developing what I perceive to be the potential of sidewalk amenities along the entire Broadway Canal system. I think that every single structure that's located along that path can be developed for those sorts of uses. And it would be, in a way, it would be kind of a waste of a resource not to do that. So I see not just one or two places to have a restaurant. I see dozens and dozens of places to have restaurants and public spaces, galleries. Hopefully selling my artwork would be really great. I can see that.
Today, and one time only, we've got a special sale on that picture right there.
Well, and in the past, the recent past and currently, there really hasn't been a place for people in Albany who have a boat to put it in Albany. If you're on the Hudson and you're looking at the city, you see concrete walls. So there really hasn't been a place to put a boat up until if this project happens, then it'd be a game changer.
This question is, any thoughts about how it can be financed? I don't think that's our world. That's more at the moment. I would just say that will come out of the design study, and I'm sure it will be a public-private kind of thing, and also the federal government will have to be involved with pretty heavy funding on this. When you look at Canal Side in Buffalo, that was funded by the state of New York and federal government money. It was, I don't know how much it was, at least $1 billion, I think. It was a lot of money. So I think if you build it, we'll get there, right?
BJ,
Yes.
didn't you have some contact with the Oklahoma Canal people who talked about the expense of constructing it and the revenue that it's generating?
Well, when you study, yes, I studied that, and what you found out was that the return on the investment was paid off in a very short period of time.
Same with Chicago.
Same thing with Chicago. I mean, the real question is not how much is it going to cost to build it. The real question is, what's the economic impact of building this in terms of revenue back to the city, to the state, and enjoyment that we're all going to have with it? That's the real question. What's the economic impact? I don't want to lose sight of that and get stuck on how much it's going to cost, because it's going to cost a lot of money. But The question is, will that money ever come back? This particular proposal that we have, unlike the others, will generate income because there's going to be businesses, there's going to be restaurants, there's going to be other things there that will generate both.
Jobs.
You got a question? This means, here, just fly it up here. Marcus. So in any event, that's I think, that. Would opening up the wall, instead of opening up the walls, would it be save budget money and increase impact to make, Central Warehouse a canvas for art?
Sounds good to me.
And we don't own it, but the developers probably wouldn't be happy with that because it wouldn't generate much money for them. But that's not, we don't have any control over that. It's a good thought, we'll pass it
I
along.
like that in Gowanus. It's called it's the old, I don't know, it's called the Bat Cave. It's really cool. It was an old factory space, but it is used as kind of a canvas.
Here's a comment. One of the disturbing things is I talk to people in Albany, and where do they go to have dinner? They go to Troy, New York. Why? Because they can sit and look at the river and watch the boats and get a vibe. Or they go to Schenectady, New York, for the very same reason. And they're, half a mile away from downtown Albany. So I think Troy, this comment is Troy's riverfront is a good example of boats coming. If you build a place, it will drive revenue, enjoyment for the people, and income. And we think that's absolutely correct. Thank you for that. Can you speak to population of Albany versus the other places that you featured, Susanna? Do we have the smallest city population of all mentioned? Oh, well, we got the biggest river. We're not in the middle of Texas. We're not in the middle of Oklahoma. There's a lot of positive answers to that.
I mean, Chicago's big. San Antonio's huge, but it doesn't feel, I was there a couple weeks ago. It doesn't feel big at
Albany
all.
must be bigger than San Antonio.
No, San Antonio's enormous, but it's all the surrounding area. The city proper feels really derelict.
It is a capital like Providence. Did I say that right? Okay.
It's a good question. I'm not sure.
So, Susanna, do you have a vision for dealing with the North End and the North River access for the project?
The North River, how you get into the,
Is that the question, how you get into it?
or,
I'm not sure I understand that question.
I can riff on it, sure. No, I think, I think, Len's vision is a really important kind of starting point for, suggesting that there is land available, and that it would be wonderful to generate great public space in that land. I think there are lots of different ways that we could shape the edges of the canal. There could be some places where it's stepped and, you can actually touch the water. Places where there could be a softer kind of ecological edge. And I'm going to speak in generalities because you really would need to study the full length and get a lot of community input and also, some engineering input to find out the sort of strategic locations of different kinds of elements. You want to make sure that you're designing something that people are going to use, or something that, say, for instance, is going to absorb the stormwater of a CSO before that gets discharged. So you want to sort of figure out the way to design strategically and beautifully, right? So you're trying to recognize a lot of different aspects, but I think there are kind of common elements that come out in any kind of project like this that involve people and what people, or how people congregate, and making public space that provides a level of comfort. So that would be shade, that would be, a place to get a drink if you're thirsty.
Okay, so those are some environmental
Yeah, so
things
lots
to make
of
it greener.
environmental
Yeah.
inputs.
So here's a good question. People are afraid to come to downtown Albany because of everything you read in the newspaper.
I'd be scared to go to Brooklyn, too, but I live there.
You live in
I'd be scared to
Brooklyn.
go to Burlington, Vermont, right?
Yeah, I know.
after
Well,
that
we
giant-
all read that, yeah.
Anyway,
I'm scared to go to Skodak.
You ever been to Cohoes?
Once in a while.
In any event, the point of this question, I think, is that we need to involve people in the planning, the vibe of it. We need to do things now. We can't wait forever to do it. And people want to be part of this project. And so we now have about 400 friends. We're looking to get 1,000 friends, and that's one of the things you can do for us today is make sure you sign up and become a friend on our website. And the call to action that you saw contains our website. It contains our P.O. Box. We're also collecting donations through our P.O. Box to the Albany Waterside, Inc., which you can fill in and send in if you would. It's all in that document that you received on the way coming in. That will help us to continue to explore a lot of these questions that you raised, all of which are good questions, and we appreciate you coming today. So I think that, thank you. We're on the way. We've got a lot more to do. I will save all these questions for the folks who are retained to do the study. And please speak to your friends, spread the word. We need more people to join us, but we will be heard and we will succeed, and this canal will be built. When my friend Lynn was interviewed by the Albany Business Review, the reporter, a young lad who said he had a lot of history and a lot of understanding of things, said to Lynn, how old are you? And Lynn said, I'm 74. And he said, really? You're never going to see this. And you know what Lynn said? I see it already. And he does, and you've seen it today. So please stay tuned on our website. We're going to continue to be speaking and doing this in other places. I think going to the high schools might be a really good idea. Whoever had that thought, that's a good one. And, once you get some students involved, things start to happen because they don't have any history to know enough to be afraid. Right? So there we go. So thank you very much. Safe home.